Welcome everyone to Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. Take a moment to stretch. You need to stretch for a second before we get started. I'll look at who's out here. I mean, we have 19 people out here on Zoom. At least that many here. So 45 Sangha tonight together. Did I introduce myself? I'm Clyde, in case anybody, I don't know if I did or not. Okay, well tonight we're starting our summer Sutta series, and that's each year we take a 4-week period during the summer, and that night the Dharma leader will take a Sutta and kind of explain the Sutta and what it means to them and how they work with it and everything. So we start that tonight. And just to give you a real brief definition of what a sutta is, in our Theravadan tradition here that we teach out of the Pali Canon, and it's the Tipitaka, and it's 3 baskets. T is 3, and then Pitaka, that's the Pali term for it. The 3 divisions are the Vinaya Pitaka, and that's the rules and the regulation for the monks and the nuns. There's the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is this very detailed analysis of the mind and thought process. We don't get involved with that a whole lot. Then there's the Sutta Pitaka, and these are the collection of discourses attributed to the Buddha and a few of his closest disciples, containing all the central teachings of Theravada Buddhism. So when you hear the Sutta, that's where it's coming from, the Sutta Pitaka. Now the Sutta Pitaka is made up of 5 collections, or 5 Nikāyas. So, and then there's the Majjhima Nikāya. I'm not going to, but there's the long discourses, the middle-length discourses, the connected or group discourses, the numerical discourses, and the division of short books. And they all have Pali names. But so that's when you hear about these suttas, that's where we're coming from. We're coming out of one of these Nikāyas. And tonight, I'm going to be talking from the Majjhima Nikāya. This is the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. And I'm doing the Majjhima Nikāya, number 18. And I'm going to pronounce it correct, like Mahu Pindika Nikāya. But it translates to the Honeyball Sutta. So it's the Honeyball Sutta. And I've seen this, but I've never really read it or looked at it and see what it was. And it just so happens that several people in our Sangha have just finished up a retreat with Lee Brasington. And I had gotten his book on dependent origination. I had got his book on dependent origination, I was reading it. And in here, he looks at several different suttas and how they discuss dependent origination. And just so happens one of the chapters on the Honeyball Sutta. And I started reading it and then I went, let me go look at this and look at it a little bit more. So that's why I decided to do that, because it has a couple things in it that I'm not going to be doing a whole lot on dependent origination tonight, but some other things around that. And so I'm going to kind of give you an outline of the sutta as we go through it. So the Buddha was on his solitary meditation practice. And this lay person came up to him and interrupted him and said, well, what do you teach? What's your doctrine? And the Buddha said, I teach in a way such that one does not quarrel with anyone, in a way that concepts no more underline one who lives detached from sensual pleasures, without bewilderment, free from worry and craving. Well, this layperson didn't like this and left. So later that evening, the Buddha was talking to his monks, and he told them what happened. And one of the monks says, well, how do you teach this? And the Buddha said, as for the source through which concepts and mental proliferation beset one, if nothing is found to desire or cling to, this is at the end of the underlying tendencies to unwholesome states, the end of quarrels and disputes. Here these evil states cease without remainder. And the thing that interested me on that was this whole idea of mental proliferation besets someone. I can really identify with that. Mental proliferation. And then it went on this whole thing about unwholesome states. We've talked here about wholesome and unwholesome states. But this idea of the end of quarrels and disputes. We don't argue with anybody. Seems kind of relevant to what's going on in the world today. So the Buddha retires to his dwelling. The monks still aren't satisfied. So they go to Venerable Mahakaccana and ask him to explain this. And when you hear the word venerable, it means they're kind of more of advanced learning. This is someone as a monk, but they've got very advanced in their practice. And he says, well, you really should ask the Buddha, but I'll give it a go anyway. He says, dependent upon I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of these three is contact, and that's just the I, a form, when they meet, is consciousness arise. I'm aware that that's a bell. I'm aware that I'm seeing that, and that's contact. With contact as condition, there is Vedana, and Vedana is feeling tone. That's pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. What one feels, that one conceptualizes, what one conceptualizes, one thinks about, what one thinks about, one mentally proliferates. And we're going to get into what that's where the problems are right there. That's where it starts, that mental proliferation. And he does this, you know, in our tradition, there are 6 senses, and he did it for the eye. And then he goes and does the same thing for the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. It's the idea of, there's a mind consciousness, there's a ear consciousness around that. And he goes through each one because that's how we interact with the world. And he ends up by saying this, and this one's a little bit longer. He says, bhikkhus, that's the monks. He says, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tend by mental proliferation beset a person. That mental proliferation is beset a person. If nothing is found there to be delight in, welcome, and hold to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, the underlying tendency to aversion, the underlying tendency to views, underlying tendency to doubt, the underlying tendency to conceit, the underlying tendency for desire for being, for ignorance. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons of quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malice, and false speech. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. And so at that point, the monks are finally happy. They go back to the Buddha and they tell the Buddha what Venerable Mahakaccana said, and the Buddha says, yep, he's right. He explained the whole thing. So that's kind of the sutta. So if we look at this and we look at it, well, what does it mean? What is it telling us here? And usually if you're studying a sutta like this, you would have to do a whole lot more detail than what I did. Fortunately, Lee Brasington did it for me because I had his book, and he kind of put it together for me to look at it. But the two things, that was the two things. This thing that this mental proliferations that besets someone. I don't know if y'all have ever had that experience before or not. And this idea of disputes and quarrels, and I've always looked at what this sutta is giving us is an overview of dependent origination, why this happened, to explain how quarrels, disputes, and other evil, wholesome states arise. And that's what I like about the teachings. It kind of explains this is why this happens. This is how this happens. This is why we're arguing. This is why we have disputes. And I've never looked at dependent origination from the standpoint. I've always looked at it kind of clinically. This conditions this, condition this, and there's 12 steps and all these links. But when you put this disputes and quarrels and evil and all this going on, well, wait a minute, maybe it does have something going on here. This quarreling. So to kind of put it, not to simplify, but it just, Lee Brasington goes on and says, dependent upon the sense organs and sense objects, sense consciousness arises, that the consciousness of that which knows. There's contact, there's Vedana, feel and tone, there's perception or conceptualization. And that's where we provides us with the name identification of the input. I see this as a bell. I know that's that perception. I know that's a bell. Thinking arises. I mean, that's a pretty bell. No, that's not such a pretty bell. It's kind of rusty. No, we need a bigger bell in here. You know, it makes it look like this one's too teeny. What am I doing now? Mental proliferation. All I did was see this bell, and all of a sudden, I've got this whole story going on. And this mental proliferation includes liking and disliking, delight, welcoming, holding. Underlying unwholesome states arise, and quarrels and disputes arise. I like this bell. You don't like this bell. I don't care whether you like this bell. It's not good. It just started from this seeing that bell. And I don't know if you noticed in here, but within this teaching are the 5 aggregates of clinging. But I won't get into those tonight. So that's kind of like this whole thing. And this is not a complete teaching on dependent origination, because I wanted to focus on a couple things coming out of here. The first thing is that, and this is from Lee Brasington also, he says, this insight into understanding how we interface with the world of our sensory input is very helpful in exploring many of the concepts of the Buddhist teachings, as well as our own direct experience. When he talks about the 6 senses, the eye, the nose, the mind, thinking, this is how we experience the world. And so it's real important. It's a very important teaching, but he uses it in here because we have all these eye consciousness, we have hearing consciousness. That's how we interpret the world. So it's important that we understand this and can work with that. In fact, several of us in here probably get an email from Tejaniya Sayadaw. And this week he said one like this. He said, this is one this week. When a car passes by, what differentiates a meditator from a non-meditator? The meditator knows that a car passed by, but also knows the experience of seeing, hearing, feeling, thoughts, the thinking mind. The non-meditator just knows that a car passes by. I could go further in that. The car is just a concept. The hearing, the seeing, the thinking is what's real. So it's important to understand this idea of the 6 senses. But then, Lee goes on to say, the key teaching from Maha Kakana's exploration in the Honeyball Sutta is that unless we're careful, the thinking gets out of hand and spirals into papancha. And we've talked about papancha in here before. Papancha refers to the tendency of the mind to think a thought, and then the next thought, and then the next thought, and then the next thought. And that's what happens. We spiral into papancha. And that's when we're out there, we're just, like I said, you hear a car during meditation or something. Well, this happened to me the other day. I was meditating, and in the other room, I got a text, ding, and the mind, well, who's texting me so early in the morning? Because it was early when I was meditating. Who's texting me? Why is someone doing this? Why is someone, next thing I knew, my mind was going on down just from this little ding. That is that mental proliferation that beset us. That's that papancha. And I can probably fairly say that most people in here have had experienced that at some point, either during a meditation or during just their daily life. And he goes, now we can understand that what the Buddha originally said to the monks. Don't let your sensory input trigger papancha. Papancha can lead to delight, welcoming, holding. This is the clinging. This is what's craving. This is what causes suffering. if you don't get entangled in this way, the underlying tendencies to unwholesome states are not there. This is the end of quarrels and disputes and other unwholesome actions. The Buddha says, guard your senses. And this is why we guard our senses. We guard our senses because it's going to lead to this whole idea of perception, conceptualization, this mental proliferation, which is going to lead to papancha. And this causes suffering. This is where our suffering comes from. And in this day and world in which we live in, it's very easy for us to get caught up in papancha. You can look at the news. The next thing you know, your mind has already gone down the road. This papancha keeps going. The mental proliferation goes and goes and goes. So how do I work with this? What do I do with this then? In the traditional teachings of dependent origination, you start at the point of the feeling tone, the Vedana, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. That's difficult. That's difficult for me to do. The mind has to be very still and stable to be able to do this. But I can work with papancha. And what I've done, what I do, we use our mindfulness to see ourselves caught up in this. When I'm caught up in this papancha, if I'm mindful, I can stop. And sometimes what I do is I kind of work backwards. I don't have to. I can just stop and come back to this present moment. But sometimes I'll see something, have seen something. Next thing I know, I'm sitting here and I'm kind of angry, upset about what's happening in this particular situation. If I see that, I go, okay, wait a minute. I'm caught up in this mental proliferation, which is besetting me. I'm upset, and then I go back and go, wait a minute. Anger was here. I'm angry over something. Angry is an unhealthy mental state. And then I go back and go, okay, I just heard something, and all this conceptualization started. So I can see where that perception, that conceptualization causes unwholesome mental state to arise, and that just snowballed in this whole thing of papancha. That way, it's easier for me to kind of work with that and see that, and see it happening. And we can work with that, because this papancha is just this whole idea of mental, and I like the phrase, it besets a person. Mental proliferation besets a person. And then it's going to lead to this unwholesome states, anything based on greed, hatred, or delusion. And that's going to lead to this concept of quarrels, disputes in the world. So use your mindfulness. Use your mindfulness so your thinking does not spiral out of control into papancha. And usually within papancha, there's probably going to be some craving there. And we know that craving is the cause of suffering. The Brazen says, don't be fooled by your conceptualizing, and remember that just because you think it does not make it so. So that is the Honeyball Sutta. It's Majjhima Nikāya number 18. Thank you for listening.